Right. Good afternoon, good morning, whenever you're watching these videos, everybody. This is the last of the live stream review sessions that's actually a review of content. This is the one over the second half of Unit 6, primarily focusing on net exports and how they get changed by your currency value changing, as well as capital flow. And in covering capital flow, I'm going to also do a thing that I think is very important with Unit 6 especially, and I'm going to explain the connections from Unit 6 back to our other units. Because especially by this point of the course, because we're at the end of it, in terms of content, you've got to be able to understand not just the content that you're learning for that unit, but how they can tie it into things from other units. Because this is a cumulative class. This is not a, oh, we're going to ask about one particular thing just one time, like a vocab heavy test. Like Gov is kind of like that. It's a class where I can bring in Unit 2 things and make them apply to Unit 6, and you have to sort of put them in context and understand what's going on. So we're talking about that at the second half of the content review. So it'll be 30 minutes of content over that, 30 minutes of practice questions over that, over the same thing. Next week's schedule is still Tuesday and Thursday after school from 4:30 to 5:30 for the live streams. Tuesday's live stream next week will be me doing what is effectively a mock FRQ portion of your exam. Because that portion you were given an hour for, and that is exactly how long my live stream is. So I'm going to pick 3 FRQs kind of at random, 2 short, 1 long. The only thing that won't be random is that I'll make sure that they are not covering all just the same topic. I'm trying to cover a bunch of different things with it. But I'll basically pick them at random, solve through them verbally, out loud, draw things, the whole 9 yards, all that stuff. Hey Judson, good to see you. So I'll do all of that and sort of walk you through how to get as many points as possible on the FRQ portion. That'll be next Tuesday. And then next Thursday is when I do the thing that I do for a lot of my classes, which is just to scare the absolute hell out of them. It's where I use one problem and I shift every graph in the course off of that one problem. I create one scenario that I can then shift every single graph in the entire course. Which, yeah, so I'll do that on next Thursday. And then next Saturday, May 8th, that's it, May 8th, is our Super Saturdays. That's when I go over kind of everything. I'm trying to find my video right now. I'm sorry, guys, I'm having a hard time locating my live stream on my YouTube channel. There it is. Okay. So I always want to check to make sure everything's working fine. There we go. But yeah, that'll be next Saturday, not this Saturday, but next Saturday, the 8th. That'll be from, I think on my schedule it says 10 a.m. till 2 p.m. Central Time. I might start going live a little bit earlier than that just to like get things set up and everything. But the game plan there is for me to go through kind of every graph model and, if I can do them as well, formula in the AP exam. All of the stuff that you couldn't just like have memorized, like things you actually kind of have to understand how to do. I'll try and do as much of that as possible in one video. And that'll be not this Saturday, but next Saturday. So we're almost done. I mean, we are less than 2 weeks away from the AP Econ exam. The AP Gov exam is 4 days away at this point. So that's fun to think about. And the Econ exam is, I want to say, 11 days away. 10 or 11 days away at this point. So we are getting real close, everybody. All right, it is 4:30 on my timer, so let's get started with the second half of Unit 6, the last bit of content review we got to do. Here we go. Okay, Unit 6 Part 2, not yesterday, what did I say yesterday? On Tuesday, that's the day of the week it was, we got into foreign exchange market and capital flow and how those, not capital flow, forex market and balance of payments accounts, and how international trade, it can be built around your currencies and the different values of the currency. Now, I didn't go through every part of it. I did leave off one big thing, which is when you change the value of your currency, you will then subsequently change your ability to import and export goods as a result of that. So let me show you what I'm talking about. Looks like I can draw everything properly on the graph this time, which is great because it wasn't working super awesome last time I was trying to do it. Let's stick with quantity of dollars, and let's make the other currency we're talking about the euro. So it's euros per dollar. Supply and demand of dollars. Let's say, for whatever reason, people in Europe want to buy more American things. I oftentimes use very stupid examples. I think in my class this semester I said that Vladimir Putin and Elon Musk become best friends, so Vladimir Putin wants to buy a bunch of Teslas, stuff like that, which would. It's not euros technically there, but I'm just going to say that there's now a greater demand for dollars in this example. This could also be, the other example I think you used first semester, Judson, was like that the French want to buy a bunch of Dodge Rams and just go across the French countryside with giant trucks with very aggressive ad campaigns. Something like that. Where there's now a greater overall demand for dollars internationally, that foreigners want to purchase more American goods and therefore will need the American currency to do so, therefore creating a larger international demand for the dollar. Now, when that happens, again, this is based off of I said yesterday again, Tuesday's video, we would say in this example that the dollar is appreciating. Which just means that the dollar is worth more relative to whatever other currency we're talking about. And again, I'm telling that off of the equilibrium, right? I was here, now I'm up here, so now it takes more euros to get a dollar. The dollar is worth more euros, literally. So dollar has appreciated in value. Now, the next part of this, which is I did leave this off of Tuesday's thing, is that when your currency changes value, your ability to export and import goods is going to get messed with. Because if it now takes more euros to get a dollar, any transaction that'll involve dollars to euros or euros to dollars is going to get messed with, which will affect your imports and exports. So, say you are an American business trying to sell your goods out in France. Well, if it now takes more euros to get a dollar, every single person in France who has a bunch of euros is effectively poorer in terms of their ability to buy American goods, because it takes more euros to get a dollar now. They would need a lot more of their money to pay for the exact same thing as before. So America would be less able to export. Our ability to export would get hurt by our currency being more valuable. Because the more valuable your currency is, the more expensive any good priced in dollars is going to be for everybody else. People in America aren't going to notice this, but if you're a foreigner trying to buy an American good, you'll notice it. Conversely, if your currency is worth more, again, in this case, in terms of euros, I get more euros per dollar here. I, as an American, can buy a lot more foreign products, at least from Europe, in this example. Our ability to import, which again, the abbreviation for import is a capital M. The abbreviation for export is a capital X. That is in the long list of abbreviations that don't make that much sense in econ because neither of those words start with those letters. But we'd be importing more because if our currency is worth more, every single good listed in euros is now cheaper for us. So whenever your currency appreciates, and this is like a rule, but you can write this down, it's like a thing to take away. If your currency is more valuable, you will be less able to export and more able to import. You'll have more spending power and effectively less selling power because all of your goods get more expensive as your currency gets more valuable. And this is important from like a real world standpoint of understanding the fact that like your currency appreciating, while it sounds good, isn't great all of the time. It's cool for consumers like me and you, like most of us, because we can import more. Our foreign goods get cheaper for us, and we like that. But if you're an American business and you're trying to sell your goods overseas, your currency getting more and more valuable sucks, straight up, because it makes it harder for you to sell your good overseas. You're not changing the price of your good at all, but it's getting more expensive anyway. That is not a good deal for a business. And for an economy as a whole, this entire situation is kind of not great, because if we're exporting less and importing more, money is leaving our economy. Because when we're buying a bunch of goods from other countries, money is leaving. It's going to those other countries. And if we're exporting less, not a lot of money is coming back. So you're going to have less money in your economy when this is going on, and that gets you to what is called capital flow. Now, capital flow just refers to the flow of that money. Capital flow is the flow of financial capital, which is money, between economies. So in this example, if we're importing more goods and exporting less goods, a bunch of financial capital is leaving the US and going to, in this case, it's France or whatever European country I pick for the euro, which would mean that America is experiencing capital outflow, money is flowing out, and France would be experiencing capital inflow, money flowing in. That's the idea. Now, it's important to understand that capital flow doesn't refer to capital in the physical or human capital sense of things that help us produce things. It's referring to financial capital, which can get messy because people might think like, oh, we're importing more, so we're bringing in more, so we've got inflow. No, capital flow is the flow of money. So if we're buying more goods, bringing in more stuff, we're sending out money to pay for all of that. So got to be careful with that with the capital flow standpoint. Additionally, you have to be careful because at different parts of this exact problem, capital flow is going in different directions. Like initially in the problem, if I'm using the people of France start wanting to buy a bunch of Dodge Ram trucks because those very aggressive ad campaigns that basically tell you if you don't buy a Dodge, you're not a man, which gotta love that. Those ad campaigns, France starts to get them, and man, do those French guys really want to buy these trucks now, for whatever reason. That would mean that capital is flowing from France to the United States to buy all these sick Dodge Rams. Well, cool, but at the end of the problem, the exact same problem, at the end of it, I said that money was flowing out of the United States, so what gives? And again, it's based on which part of the problem I'm talking about. Initially in the problem, they're buying more stuff from us, so money starts flowing to us. But as that happens, as that continues to happen on and on and on, and our currency gets more and more and more valuable, we'll be able to buy more stuff from them. Think about it, because more money is like coming to us, so we'll have more money to spend. And we'll buy more stuff from them, so capital would eventually flow out. What you have to be careful of there is read your questions carefully and see when they're asking about capital flow. And a lot of times on multiple choice questions, it might be like an order of operations kind of deal where they say, hey, people want to buy goods from America. What's happening to capital flow there? Cool. I would say that they're buying goods from America, so capital's flowing into the United States and out of whatever countries are buying the goods. But if they say anything about the value of the currency as a part of this, like, hey, people want to buy stuff from America, what's happening to the value of the currency and what's happening to capital flow as a result of that? It's like, okay, well then I got to do this. Okay, the dollar is appreciating, so we'd be importing more, so capital would be flowing out. It's a whole lot to deal with. What makes it even more to deal with, which is super annoying, is that capital flow is one of the things that affects your loanable funds market. It is straight up one of the things that's on the list of shifters for your loanable funds market. It's often labeled as foreign investment, but I often tell my students they're talking about capital flow. So my loanable funds market graph, which as a reminder is the market for loans within an economy. That's easier than writing it. Supply of loans and demand for loans. You might also see this as supply of loanable funds or demand of loanable funds, and then real interest rate is my y-axis. If we've got more money flowing into our economy, more money coming in from other countries because they want to buy our goods or they want to invest in us because of a higher interest rate, then we would start to see capital flowing in, which means there's a bunch more money in our economy than before. And this shouldn't be rocket science, but if there's a bunch more money in our economy, for a lot of people, that means there's going to be a lot more money in your bank, because that's where most of us put our money. Well, if there's more money in our bank, then this graph is going to get affected, because it's the market for loans, and where do loans come from, if not from banks? So if there's a bunch more money in the bank, banks have more to lend out, which would lead to a higher, oh, that shouldn't be an arrow, oopsie daisy. There we go. A higher supply of loans. Oh God, please no. There we go. That's why I don't like typing, because it always treats it as a subject. That would give me a higher supply of loans. So capital inflow, more money coming in, should lead to a higher supply of loanable funds because more money is coming into your economy. Banks have more money to lend, so there's more of a supply of loans. And if you got capital outflow, money leaving your economy, then banks would have less money to lend out, so a lower overall supply of loans. So here's the big deal for what this last couple bits of Unit 6 are. You got to be careful because Unit 6 is a lot more complicated than it seems. Because on the surface, stuff like the Forex market graph, like a how much I have to worry about shifting standpoint, is actually kind of an easy graph to manipulate. And talking about international trade, it's like, yeah, we should trade with other countries. Like, the concept is kind of easy to deal with. The hard part is there is a lot of logic steps you can do to ask more questions off of Unit 6's material. Like, okay, people want to buy your stuff, so your currency gets worth more. Yeah, if your currency is worth more, can you sell as many goods to other countries? Well, no. If that happens, where's money going to be going? Well, out. Well, okay, if it's going out, then can banks lend as much? Well, no. That's all one problem, basically. That's just a whole lot of logical steps to get to the ending, and you've got to really follow the route there, which is the tricky part here. Is to understand the route and the sequence, which is like, okay, draw the Forex market graph, see what happens to the value of the currency, then what happens to exports and imports off of the value of the currency change, then what happens to capital flow off of the net exports change, and then what happens to loanable funds market graph off of the change in capital flow. That's a lot, and that can still be a multiple choice question, to be honest. I mean, my students literally today had a test over Unit 6, and they got a bit scared because some of the questions effectively asked them to do that many steps in one multiple choice question, which is a lot to deal with. Now, the last part of this, and the last thing that we need to review before I move on to practice questions about it, is how all of this stuff allows us to connect to other units. Now, obviously here, capital flow gets us to the loanable funds market, which was a part of your Unit 4. So there's a way already. But if we're looking at the other units in the course, we want to be aware of things that connect you to everything, because the questions on the AP exam, especially the FRQs, are going to harp on how you get from one graph to the other. So if we're looking at the aggregate demand, aggregate supply stuff, the stuff we've learned in Unit 6 that would connect to aggregate demand, aggregate supply, that would connect to that overall model, that overall graph, that entire concept. Well, if we're talking about this unit as a whole, we got to be talking about, let's start with the current and the financial account. So what from the current account would apply to my aggregate demand, aggregate supply model? Well, the current account records net exports, net investment income, net transfers. Well, net exports is an aggregate demand component. So when I say something like the current account is moving towards a surplus, that means that you're exporting more, which means aggregate demand is going up. It's a real weird way to say aggregate demand is going up, but it's a way to say aggregate demand is going up, because current account surplus means people are buying more of our stuff, most likely. Could be more transfer money coming in, but that would still lead to more income and spending. Additionally, how GDP affects the Forex market, where if your GDP starts to go up in your economy, that means your average overall income level should also be rising. Well, if people have more money, they can buy more stuff from other countries, which would lead to us, demanding other currencies, supplying more of our own, our currency depreciating, all that stuff. So one of the shifters of the Forex market is effectively a change in real GDP, which is my x-axis on the aggregate demand, aggregate supply graph. So yep, that works. Price level also affects it, because if I said the price level in the United States is going down, which is a thing that I could show on my aggregate demand supply graph, if price level is going down, then people would want to buy more stuff from America, because America's goods are now comparatively cheaper, and wouldn't you know, that's Forex market. If other people from other countries want to buy more of our stuff, that'll also go there. I just mentioned that appreciation and depreciation affect net exports, which affects aggregate demand as well. Your currency depreciates, what happens to aggregate demand? My currency depreciates, so we can export more and import less, so aggregate demand would start to rise because there's be greater demand for our goods because our goods are cheaper by result of depreciation. That also works. That's also connected to it. Yikes. And stuff like that. So this is the thing where it gets tricky for the course, is it's not just knowing all of the points themselves, it's knowing or recognizing how I can connect from one to the other. Because multiple choice questions can get kind of scary, because you'll see multiple choice answers that are referencing things from other units. You're like, why are they talking about price level here? It's like, well, price level is on my aggregate demand supply graph. You're like, yeah, I know. And it's like, well, price level means everything in your economy getting more expensive, which wouldn't that change how many people from other countries want to buy your stuff? And you're like, oh, yeah, it would. It's like, right. That's where it gets tricky. Unit 4, that's the money market and monetary policy. This one's a bit easier to spot the connective tissue between these units. It's pretty on the nose for this, which is that any monetary policy or money market thing is going to change interest rates. And if you change interest rates, then the Forex market gets affected, because we mentioned that people want to invest where there is a higher interest rate internationally. So, for example, doing a contractionary monetary policy, if you're picturing the money market graph, decreases the money supply, gets you a higher nominal interest rate, which would lead to more foreign investment. People would want your currency more, currency appreciates, stuff like that. So any change in interest rate, that's going to be a Forex market thing. Additionally, any change in interest rates will probably also affect your current account. Could also affect your financial account. The idea being that if you have a higher interest rate, it's going to make it harder for people in your economy to spend. So when I say, like, I drive a Toyota, it's a Japanese car, right? If loans are more expensive, I'm less likely to buy a car, which includes imports quite often. So if interest rates go up, the current account would actually be getting kind of helped out by that, because I wouldn't be able to spend as much, which would help the current account stay in a surplus. Because if I can't buy goods from other countries, our imports stay kind of low, which helps the current account. A lot of stuff going on there. Sticking with the interest rates thing, which is why I mentioned the importance of interest rates, because interest rates are a big connective tissue bit here. Interest rates also affect capital flow, because again, countries want to invest where there's a higher interest rate internationally. So if Japan's got a higher interest rate than the United States, then we could imagine that capital will flow out of the US and into Japan. So there's that. And whenever we change those interest rates again because of monetary policy, it would change that capital flow. So all of this stuff with the money market is going to come up quite a bit. So you will fairly frequently see monetary policy and money market stuff linked right into the Forex market. Going from Unit 4 to Unit 6 is a very common thing for this class, just because interest rates are like one of the two things that affect your Forex market graph, and interest rates are the y-axis on your money market, as well as your loanable funds market. So either of those graphs getting messed with, there's a pretty solid chance, or at least if I'm writing AP exam questions, I'm like, that's an easy connection for me. That's just an easy thing for me to be like boom to boom on an FRQ, which we'll see one of these. For Unit 5, the big topic I can connect to there is economic growth, although I can also connect to the Phillips curve through aggregate demand, aggregate supply stuff from Unit 3. But for economic growth, interest rates again. Interest rates and how they lead to capital stock. So remember that capital stock, the total amount of capital in your economy, is driven a lot of times by investment spending. And because investment spending and interest rates are inversely related, all of this interest rate talk for this unit that has come up would be affecting that economic growth. That you having a lower interest rate can lead to more investment spending, more accumulation of capital, and more growth. The big thing to take away from all three of these, which is daunting, it is scary to hear like all of the different connective tissues, is interest rates, especially with this unit, are super important. Like the fact that they keep bringing up interest rates, and it's been kind of brought up for the last 3 units pretty heavily. For 4, 5, and 6, kind of the most important thing is interest rates. That's the bridge between these units very easily. And it gets you to Unit 3 too, because changing interest rates changes investment spending, which changes aggregate demand. So it's a very common thing to see that interest rate bit be kind of the crux of a lot of these questions, that if you don't know what's happening to interest rates, you're going to have a really hard time. When in doubt, you should always be thinking, if there's more money in your economy, interest rates should start to go down, because If there's more money in your economy, loans should be getting cheaper. It's hard to convince me to borrow if there's a bunch of money out there, right? I won't need to borrow if there's a bunch of money out there, so they'll have to charge really little. That would get my interest rates really low, helping spending, helping economic growth, on and on and on. Okay, in terms of content review, that's it. Now again, that last chunk is like fairly high level stuff that applies mostly to the FRQs, although in this unit you'll see some multiple choice questions that really do hit on how these other units are connected. This chunk right here, the appreciation, depreciation, net exports, capital flow, and how that ties to the global funds market, that's stuff that's actually a part of Unit 6's direct label. But when you're doing Unit 6, because it's the last unit, everything from previous units can get slapped in there for fun. That's what... It's a scary thing is whenever students do like the Unit 6 practice test or the Unit 6 progress check, it's one of the hardest ones for kids because you actually are supposed to know everything at that point. So everything is fair game in the question. I can reference CPI in the question because you should know CPI measures inflation. So if they say CPI is going up, they just mean there's more inflation. You know that, right? And it's like, okay. Maybe I know that. Like, hey, Phillips curve, what's happening? You're like, oh, that was unit. Okay, I did learn that. That's where the thing gets kind of tricky. Okay, so let's look at some of these questions and what I mean by them being connected and how this works on your actual questions. Let's make it much easier to read. That's better. And let me grab my pen because, as is tradition, I cannot for the life of me remember to open this pen app before I do the live stream. Have to do it during it. There we go. Okay, so here's a connection question. Assume that the U.S. Central Bank, which is just the Federal Reserve, sells bonds on the open market. How will it affect our Forex market and U.S. exports? What? Okay, so you got to stick with what you know. Central bank selling bonds is a monetary policy. It's a money supply thing. It's a money market deal. This is a money market graph problem that then goes into a Forex graph problem, and it's a multiple choice question, which is awesome. So my money market graph looked like this. Supply of money, demand of money. Quantity of money is the X. It's a very scrunched up Q. Nominal interest rate is the Y. The central bank selling bonds on the open market is a contractionary monetary policy because the central bank is selling bonds. If the Fed is selling bonds, that means the public is buying them. The public is giving the government a bunch of money for these bonds right now, so there's less money out in our economy because the Fed has more of it. Remember, the money held by the central bank is not a part of our money supply. So we got a decrease in the money supply. That gets you a higher interest rate. Now I can actually start the problem. This is what I mean by the connective tissue between questions makes things kind of hard. Is that like, I had to be able to do all of that before I can even look at any of these answer choices. Because what this is really saying is, hey, U.S. has a higher interest rate. U.S. interest rate go up. What happens to the value of the dollar? What happens to the U.S.'s exports as a result? But I had to remember all of that just to get myself there. So, interest rates gone up. People will want to invest in the United States internationally, so that should get me an appreciation of the dollar. So, nope, nope, nope. This last one is also an increase, but I'll scroll down for it. Yeah, last one's increase. I can go off of that, thank you. So that is correct. Because if we have a higher interest rate, they will want to invest here because they get a higher rate of return. They can make more money by doing it. So the value of the dollar goes up. And then if the value of the dollar goes up, what happens to our exports? They go down. Because if your currency is worth more, all of your goods are more expensive for foreigners. Remember that exports are your goods sold overseas. So if I think, like, okay, my currency is worth more, all of my goods are now worth more, which means they're more expensive overseas, which means they would go down. If they're more expensive, foreigners won't buy them as much. So the answer is A. But that's a lot of work to solve that problem. It's a lot. It's a lot of things you got to be able to do. You have to have kind of all of your ducks in a row to be able to get this question. You have to you have to know that monetary policies affect interest rates, and that's how I'd go from the selling bonds to get to my forex market is the interest rate deal. I then have to know that selling bonds gets me a higher interest rate to then have a chance. But there are some things here that are helpful. This would not work. No change, decrease does not make sense. Decrease does not happen. Your currency becoming less valuable does not make you export less, it makes you export more. Decrease, increase, possible combination, E, increase, impossible combination. The only two that even actually work as answers that are linked are A and D. So if you could figure out that the government selling bonds would actually give you a higher interest rate and would increase the value of the dollar, the only one that makes sense is A. You still have to know a lot to be able to process of elimination out that problem. Okay, sorry, there was some weird stream feedback thing there. I know you guys just saw me looking at the live stream, but there was a weird thing where it's in my stream was trying to reconnect. So if there's a weird bit of lag or a weird jump there, apologies. Okay. Second question. Country X's government increases its spending without raising taxes. Which of the following is true about the effect of country X's real interest rates and its subsequent effect on net exports? Okay. So they increase spending without raising taxes. They ask about real interest rate. If I see them asking about real interest rate, I already know what graph they're talking about. Because there's only one graph where real interest rate is showing up, and that's my loanable funds market. And I should also know, at least should be able to recognize, that when they're talking about this, government increasing spending without increasing taxes, they're talking about crowding out. They're talking about the government having to borrow to finance its spending. Because if they're increasing spending without raising taxes, the government's going to have to borrow. Which means in my loanable funds market graph, there's a greater demand for loans. Because if the government wants to borrow more, there's a greater overall demand now for loans. So I get a higher real interest rate. Goodbye, D and E. And it asks about net exports again. All right. If your interest rate is higher, which is just what happened last time as well. Interest rate is higher, so I will have my currency, and this is again the dollar here, or whatever country X's thing is, I'm just going to say dollar, appreciates, my exports go down, my imports go up, which would get me lower net exports, because exports went down. That'll drive my net exports down. So it ain't C, because again, that shouldn't really be happening here. It's either A or B. This also doesn't really work, because if your interest rate goes up, your currency is worth more, which makes your net exports go down. So it's B on the second one. 3. The value of the dollar increases on the forex market. What'll happen in the short run? First, gotta love they say short run. Thank you, Jesus, they said short run. Next, all of these are asking about aggregate supply and aggregate demand. So I gotta figure, what does the dollar appreciating do to my aggregate demand, aggregate supply curve? Well, we only know really of one thing that gets directly affected by your dollar appreciating, and that's, like we've said, the last two questions, net exports. And again, like the last two, the dollar is appreciated, so less exports, more imports. But what does that do to my aggregate demand, aggregate supply graph? I have lower exports, higher imports. Well, XN is a part of my aggregate demand shifters. It was C, I, G, and XN. And XN, just like the last problem, is dropping here. We're exporting less and importing more. So XN is falling. Our net exports are falling. That will lead to lower aggregate demand. There is less demand for our stuff because our currency is worth more, making our goods too expensive. Because it's talking specifically about not what caused the dollar to go up, but the dollar has gone up in value. What's happening next? Like, it's always order of operations here, what they're talking about. They're saying the dollar is worth more. Then what happens to aggregate demand, aggregate supply curve? Dollar could have gone up because people want more of our stuff, but it's asking based off the dollar going up in value, what's happening to our stuff. We have less spending power. Or at least, our spending power wouldn't be helpful. Because we'd be able to buy a lot of stuff from other countries. Imports are bad. XN is exports minus imports. Imports going up is a bad thing here. We don't want that. So aggregate demand will decrease. Question 4. An increase in the government's deficit spending will likely affect your open economy, which just means an economy that can engage in trade, in which is the following ways. I'm seeing capital outflow. I'm seeing currency appreciation. Deficit spending. What is this? It's when the government has to borrow in order to spend. You do need to know vocabulary to do stuff. Again, deficit spending is a loanable funds market thing. It's crowding out. Yet again, crowding out shows up a bunch. And again, crowding out is most often shown as an increase in the demand for loans. It could be shown as a decrease in supply. That's also allowed. It doesn't matter which one of those you pick, because either way, higher interest rate. Which, so far, all 4 of these have gotten me a higher interest rate. So, when I say that interest rates are important, it's because when I pull up questions over the Forex market, I see interest rates as the main thing most of the time. So interest rates are going up in your economy. What will be happening to your capital flow? I've got a higher interest rate, meaning people will want to do what? Other countries, they'd want to invest here. So money would be flowing in. So should have inflow. It's not going to have no change in capital flow. I don't know what this deal is. I will have capital inflow, and people want to invest more in the United States, so currency is appreciating. Didn't ask about net exports that time. That's cool. Just asked about capital flow, which is where is the money going. If we have a higher interest rate, it's coming here. They want to invest in us now. Once you get this back to that currency appreciation deals before. Okay, if real interest rates in the U.S. fall relative to the interest rates of Britain, what'll happen? Okay, well, ours is lower than theirs, so I got to think logically what's going on. If we've got a lower interest rate than Britain, then we will want to invest in Britain. So money's going from the U.S. to Britain. So where are we going from here? Let's look at the answers now. British investors will buy more U.S. securities, meaning they'd buy more bonds from us. If we have a lower interest rate than them, they should not be buying our bonds. Because for a bond, remember that in a bond you want the highest interest rate possible. It gets you a higher rate of return. I'd be buying British bonds. They would not be buying ours. Second, British exports to the U.S. will increase. Well, if we are trying to invest in Britain, the pound... Can I draw this freehand? Haha, kind of. The pound should be appreciating here because we want to invest there, which we mentioned like the last 4 questions, that makes it harder for you to export. So no. The supply of dollars will decrease. I assume they mean internationally. If they mean money supply, definitely not. If they mean internationally, also not. Because if we're trying to invest in Britain, we are supplying more dollars internationally, so that's also wrong. The demand for pounds will decrease. Nope, it's increasing. The pound will appreciate relative to... okay, that's what I said. Easy. Oh, alright, it's just that the pound will appreciate, yeah. That one's faster. You could probably solve that one faster, because you see that we want to invest in Britain. Okay, well then we'd want the pound, so the pound's worth more. Oh, it's E. Done. Question 6. If the real interest rate in the U.S. increases relative to the rest of the world, then capital flow should go where? Interest rates higher here. People want to invest here. Money should be flowing to us, and the dollar would be appreciating. I mean, guys, I'm picking questions off of a long list of them, sort of at random here for a lot of these. This is just to show you how often it's interest rates. That's what they're talking about. How often? Most of the time. So you really need to have your money market and your loanable funds market graph down for Unit 6. Because they expect you to have it down by then. And then 7. If the central bank of country Z wishes to increase the value of its currency on the forex market, they want their currency to appreciate. What should the central bank do? Okay, central bank is the one who can do monetary policy. They're the ones who can change the discount rate, reserve requirement, buy and sell bonds. Okay, let's look at the answer choices. Buy other currencies. Technically speaking, a central bank can do this. This is actually a thing that they can do. It's not talked about a lot in AP economics, but it is a possibility. But if you're trying to have your currency appreciate, buying a bunch of other currencies is not going to help. It's going to make those other currencies more valuable and make yours less. B is increasing the money supply in country Z. Well, let's look at their money market graph. If I increase the money supply, I would get a lower interest rate, which would not make people want to invest in my country. That would not really help, because lower interest rate here would not get more people to want my currency, which is the whole goal here. They want whatever Z's currency is to appreciate. A lower interest rate does not help. Increasing income taxes, well, one, the central bank can't do that. That's not their power. That's not a thing they can do. It's the government is the one who controls that part. Raise interest rates. Okay, we said lower interest rates aren't helpful, so raising them probably would be. And it's true. A higher interest rate would get people to want to invest more in your country internationally, so that would get your currency to appreciate. So that would work, and they can raise interest rates. It's through changing the money supply that they do that, but they are changing interest rates, so that's possible. Increasing tariffs. Again, tariffs, not a thing that the central bank can do. Tariffs would be done by Congress in America, or by whatever the legislative branch is for most governments. The central bank does not control tariffs. The central bank controls the money supply, and tariff is not a money supply thing. It's a tax, and taxes aren't done by the central bank. So you do have to know what are monetary policies and what are not monetary policies, because C and E are both fiscal policy. All right, game time. Look at this bad boy. Love to see an FRQ that has a part F. This, my students, is a long FRQ. And you got to be very careful about the long FRQ. On your AP exam, the long FRQ you should be budgeting right at or about 30 minutes for. That's a freaking long time for not an essay. For a non-essay based question, that is a lot. And what you might realize in looking through it, and I'm just going to do a quick little scan of this question. I see draw an aggregate demand supply graph. I see correctly labeled loanable funds market graph. I see value of a currency. I see trade balance. I see long run growth. That's like when they give you reading time on the AP exam, that's what you should be looking for. It's like, what kind of things are they asking me about? They're asking me about aggregate demand supply graph. Easy, I can deal with that. Asking about loanable funds market graph. Okay. Asking me about the value of the currency. That means they're asking about the Forex, even if it doesn't tell me to draw a Forex market graph, which it doesn't. It's still asking about it. It's asking about the trade balance, which is just imports and exports, which is what's happening here. So that's all imports, exports. Excuse me. And then it's asking about long run growth. We go bit by bit, step by step, part by part, whole way through, get all the points we can. All right, gotta read this first thing here. It's not to hide from you, you gotta see it. Assume their economy is operating below full employment, ding, 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 has a balanced trade, which just means that their exports are equal to their imports. Weird, that isn't a thing that happens a lot, but good for them. And they're running a budget deficit. So they're below full employment, which means that they are in a recession. They currently have balanced trade. That's good. They're running a budget deficit. That's very relatable. So let's draw the aggregate demand supply graph and show my current output and price level. Okay. Now, things that might throw students off here. A lot of my students don't want to draw long-run aggregate supply if they can help it. And the question, at least, doesn't tell them to. So they're like, oh, Maybe I don't need to draw long aggregate supply here. No, you for sure need to draw LRAS because of this. Because of this statement right there. When they reference full employment, they're telling you where to draw LRAS. If I'm operating below full employment, that means I'm in a recessionary gap. So my graph, properly labeled, should look like that. Where my current level of production, this equilibrium point right here, is behind my full employment level of production, which is where LRAS is at. So like YE is my current equilibrium GDP, YF is my full employment level of GDP, and YE is less than YF. So there's A. Suppose their country's government increases spending to achieve full employment output. On your graph, show the short run effect. Again, thank you, Christ, for short run. That the increased deficit spending, which yes, it is deficit spending if they're increasing spending here, on each of the following. Show how it affects aggregate demand, output, and price level. First off, class, look at this. Look at the students. Look what they told you. Look at that. Look at that right there. Look at that right there. Look at this. Look at that. Look at that. They're telling you it changes aggregate demand. That's so kind of them. They don't have to do that. The AP exam does do that sometimes. Well, they'll tell you stuff. And it also tells you two other things here. If you just have a brain fart and forget what your axes are on your aggregate demand supply graph, one, it says show their current output and price level and their output and price level multiple times. To be clear, real GDP measures output, but you could write output if you wanted. It told me what my axes were. That's so nice. I didn't even have to remember it. The AP exam told me. That's great. It doesn't tell me how to draw it, but it does tell me what my axes are. Thank you. It also tells me that the government increasing spending should affect aggregate demand, and it even tells me that they're trying to achieve full employment. So I shouldn't need much help figuring out what happens on the graph. They're increasing spending. They're trying to get to full employment output. It's affecting aggregate demand. I mean, they're giving me every little bit of help they can give me in this problem. Tell me, hey dummy, hey you big idiot, increase aggregate demand. The government increased spending, AD should go up. This also helps you a couple other ways. If you had botched your drawing here, this should have thrown you off. Because if you had, for some reason, drawn your aggregate demand supply curve like that, which is an inflationary gap, but say you got them mixed up, because it happens, you guys get them mixed up occasionally, and it says the government increases spending to achieve full employment output, you should know that increasing government spending does that. And that does not get me back to full employment. So what the hell? I know increasing government spending increases AD. What? Oh God, I drew the LRAS in the wrong place. Like, there are ways in the questions to check your own answer as you go through the questions. Especially the long FRQ, because they have to be very deliberate about what they're asking about, because when you start to connect a bunch of dots between units, there's about 1 billion things that you could be connecting to there. Let me check my live stream real quick. Okay, it's still there. Yeah, my live stream did go down and back up at one point, I can tell. Okay. Because it says I've only been streaming for 17 minutes, and I know I've been streaming for more than that. Okay. So my aggregate demand went up, my output went up, and my price level went up. Easy peasy. All of that is shown on my graph through my brilliant labeling of my X and Y axis. And my dotted lines, draw them. They're not an option. They're not a suggestion. Draw them. Stop being lazy. Okay. C. Using a correctly labeled graph of the loanable funds market graph, show the effect of the increase in deficit spending on the real interest rate. Again, the AP exam does this a lot on the FRQs. This is incredibly kind of them, which is to say, if you forgot your loanable funds market graph, or at least how to properly label it, the question's telling you, hey, what happens to the real interest rate? Which means that the real interest rate is on this graph. It's the y-axis. Doesn't tell you what the x-axis is, but that's quantity of loans or quantity of loanable funds. Doesn't tell you what the graph looks like, but it does tell you the y-axis, which is the real interest rate, which frankly is the thing people mess up the most on local funds market graph. A lot of people want to put nominal interest rate there, and they botch it. So I got real interest rates my y-axis, I got quantity of loans is my x, doing my quantity at equilibrium and my interest rate at equilibrium. So like here's my full graph, properly labeled, look at everything looks good there. You can see the ring light. Okay. So there's an increase in deficit spending. Again, deficit spending just means the government doesn't have the money to pay for stuff, which it already told me that. They're in a budget deficit. They increased government spending. So they're going to be borrowing more. And if they're borrowing more, I can draw this as one of two things. I can draw this as either an increase in demand because there is an overall larger desire to borrow. There's a greater overall demand for loans in this economy. Or I could draw it as a decrease in supply if I wanted to be like, well, now the banks have less to lend out to us, which isn't incorrect. So you could actually do that as well. I prefer the increased demand for loanable funds. I like that a little bit better. Makes more sense to me when I do that. But up to you on this one. It's actually kind of subjective on how you want to draw it. Either way, you get a higher real interest rate, which is what this question really cares about. Real interest rates going up. The reason why they care is because given your answer in part C, explain how the value of your currency will be affected. So one, I don't get to draw it, which is kind of a bummer. And two, I have to explain it, which means I got to use real words, which also kind of a bummer. So I have a higher real interest rate, although in this, I mean, based on the video I've done so far, I have had to explain this specifically like 7 different times, so I get to explain it again. So here's what I would write. Given the higher real interest rate, citizens or people from other countries will want to invest more into this country. They don't give you names, which is kind of annoying that you have to play the pronoun game there, but people will want to invest more into this country internationally because the higher real interest rate will yield them, and that's a good word to use, is yield, will yield them a higher rate of return on their investments. Because of this, the currency for this country will appreciate in value. Because of this increased demand for their currency, this currency will appreciate in value. What you have to say is how the value of the currency will be affected, which is because of a higher interest rate, it will appreciate, and you have to explain it, which is because foreigners will want to invest more in a country with a higher interest rate because it gives them a higher rate of return on their investments. They can make more money off of their investments through that higher interest rate. So again, a lot of your explanations will have to be like, I would say at least 3 lines of text for you to have probably enough information there to get your point. That one might have been like 4 lines of text, I would bet. Okay, based on your answer to part D, which is that the currency appreciated is like what they're talking about, respond to each of the following. Explain the effect on imports and export and identify their trade balance. Okay, I have explained this a couple of times already today as well. It does say to explain it. I'm just writing what the technical answer is. I will verbally explain it. You would have to write it. So your currency is appreciating. That means you will be exporting less and importing more, because if your currency is worth more, it'll make your goods more expensive for people from other countries, decreasing exports. And it will allow citizens of your country to buy more foreign goods because your currency gets more of other currencies. It's worth more, so all of the opposing goods or all other countries' goods get cheaper, increasing imports. That's a lot. It's a lot to write. Yeah, it's a lot to write. You got 30 minutes to solve the problem, guys. It's plenty of time to write a couple of fairly long things. Like there's 3 things you have to explain in this and 2 graphs you have to draw. 30 minutes is plenty for that. Okay? You can write all that in 30 minutes. Okay. Identify their trade balance. They did have balanced trade before. That's why this statement is here. Their exports used to equal their imports. They are now importing more, exporting less. This is a trade deficit. It just says to identify So all you have to say is that this economy is now in a trade deficit. Again, answer, please, in complete sentences. Do not just give me small baby answers. These things that I'm putting on the screen are just things that I'm writing because I'm using a mouse. I'm saying the things I would be writing. So they are in a trade deficit. That's the answer to that one. Because they're exporting less, importing more. They are losing trade is a way to say it, but it's too simple probably. And then given the results in your loanable funds market discussed in part C, so they're referencing this again, which is kind of weird. They're talking about this. Talking about C. They are ignoring D and E completely. They're just talking about C here. Explain again how this government deficit spending would influence long-run growth. Unit 5. Long-run growth, economic growth, is tied to capital. It's tied to how many resources you have. Tied to how many tools, technology, machinery, the good stuff, the stuff that sticks around that you've got in your economy. Remember, investment spending, the spending done by businesses, is two things. One, it's mostly on capital. Good. So we want more investment spending. And two, it's inversely related to interest rates. When interest rates in your economy go up, investment spending goes down. Because for businesses within your economy, it is now more expensive to borrow, which means they can't borrow as much, can't spend as much, and can't buy as much capital, which reduces their capital stock. So the long run growth for your economy would be decreasing. You would have less growth long term. Full answer explained. Here we go. The deficit spending will lead to less long-term economic growth because through deficit spending, real interest rates rise, making investment spending within your economy go down because higher interest rates make it harder for businesses to borrow and spend. And since businesses won't be able to spend as much, they won't be able to acquire as much capital, which would allow them to have more economic growth. So by making interest rates higher, you are making it harder to acquire capital and therefore harder to grow long term because of those long-term production things. That explanation probably would have been my longest. I probably would have had that without whatever time I have left in the AP exam. I probably would have written a mini paragraph, like a good 5-liner for F. Because I have to explain a lot there. I have to explain how the real interest rate thing is going down. I got to explain why that matters to economic growth, which means I got to kind of explain the investment interest rate relationship and then how that ties into capital and how capital ties into economic growth. Like, there's a lot of things I really have to connect the dots for to get the answer there. I want to see what the scoring guidelines are for that, actually. I want to see exactly what they wanted from an answer standpoint on there, like how much you had to write. So part F, long run growth will decline. You had to mention that real interest rates reduce investment in capital stock, which capital would have been fine, causing growth to decrease. Yep. Nailed it. Now, I would explain how this works, because you do have to explain how this works, but you needed to have this to get your points. Needed to. The nice thing is you would have got 1 point just for saying that long run growth will decline, which is why I would start with that in my answers in case I ran out of time. I would have at least had long run growth will decline because, and I got like long growth will decline, point. And then if I ran out of time, I would have missed this point. But from looking at this question, look at all the points. I got 3, 5, 8, 10, 13, 15 point problem here. I got a 15-point problem here. Your goal in the AP exam is to get about 80% of points to get a 5. I could miss 2 points on this question comfortably and still feel pretty confident that I'm on pace for a 5. So even if I can't answer F, I run out of time on F, I still could have gotten a 5 if I had gotten everything else right. The last thing I want to mention here is because I did do a lot for this entire problem. Let me mention the thing that matters here. So it probably wouldn't have started to matter until C, because there's not a lot of different things you could really do for A and B to get different points. But say on C you mess up. You increase the supply of loanable funds and for some reason get a lower real interest rate. say you get real interest rates going down because you mess up your global funds market graph, and if you're looking at this thing, like D is based on C, E is based on D, which is based on C, F is based on C, you might panic because you might think like, oh my god, I missed everything from C to the end. If you said that real interest rate went down, all you have to do from there is answer D correctly based off what you put on C. So if you said real interest rate went down, your answer to D should then be the opposite of what I gave. As I gave you the answer to D if interest rate went up. If interest rate goes down, your currency would depreciate because people wouldn't want to invest there. If you wrote that for D, you would get the point for D because based off your answer in C, you actually did D right. So you do get points on the econ exam if you make a mistake but then follow that mistake correctly from then on. Like you make a mistake and then you actually do the right thing off of that mistake. Oh, sorry, 1 second. Closing a window. Okay. So you have to be careful with that on the econ exam of don't try and cover your bases. Don't be like, I don't know what happens to interest rate here. I'm just gonna wing it on D. No, put an answer for interest rate. Like if you're not sure what happens on the funds market graph, do something on it. Draw that graph, draw whatever, like give it a guess, and then go off of that guess. You have a lower interest rate in your drawing, cool. Answer D based off lower interest rate. Answer E based off of D. Okay. It's going to be based off the previous problem. When it says given your answer in that part, it means this answer has to be based correctly off of your previous one. So if you mess up this one, you've got to do this right based off what you did here. Which means you got to be very careful with your AP exam questions because it does allow you to get more points that way. It also makes grading yourself kind of annoying because you might be like, well, I said that interest rate decreased, but then I did everything else you did for DE and F, Mr. McRitchie. It's like, okay, then you got everything wrong here because you didn't do the right thing based off of your real interest rate. You probably would have gotten the points for E because E is based on D, so if you said the currency appreciated and then did what I did on E, you would get the point for E, but you're putting yourself in a really bad hole. My recommendation is get the question right. That's probably for the best. That's probably your best bet is just get the whole question right, guys. Come on. Just be good at econ. That's all you got to do. Just be really good at it. That's it. Okay. Last thing I'll mention is the thing that I found out about like yesterday, which is a very, very good AP exam review site, not just for econ, but especially for AP government. And that is called Fiveable. 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 It's a website with like 5 million people that use it. Like a lot of people use it. It's a massive AP exam review website that has a bunch of really good resources for all of your AP exams. For Gov, it has every court case with like a nice description of the court case, not a very long one, like a 4-line description of the court case. Tells you what the impact of the case is. Tells you what the case is really about. Like this case is really about federalism, or this case is really about the Commerce Clause. Like tells you all that stuff. And they have videos and like trivia game style Kahoot things you can do. They have live streams as well for other classes. I know that I'm doing these for econ, and these are free, but there are ones for other classes as well, in case you're taking Calculus BC, or Physics, or Government, or English Lang, or Lit, and you need extra help. Fiveable. Can't recommend that enough. Was digging through there yesterday and today, and I was like, man, there's a lot of good stuff here. Absolutely feel free to use it. So I recommend that website. Outside of that, that is it for today's video. Reminder that next week will not be content reviews, but will still be skill reviews, because next Tuesday I will do what is effectively an FRQ mock myself. I will pull up the FRQs and kind of like this one, solve through the whole thing, whole time. I'll make sure that they're FRQs that I have not seen before, so I don't know the answers going into them. So I'm completely speaking off of my head and not off of the answers that I know. I'm going through 3 FRQs, 2 short, 1 long, over everything in the course, just making sure stuff covers kind of everything. And then next Thursday, I'm doing my 6 graph shift live stream, which is me going through one problem that affects all 6 graphs. So if the connection part of this video where I connected this stuff to other units was like, man, I need to work on that. That 6 graph shift thing next Thursday is really good for you seeing how these are all connected and how they all bounce back to each other. So that's next week's schedule. And then next Saturday, Saturday, May 8th, I'm doing a live stream Super Saturday, which is like as big a review as I can do, little bit over every graph and model for the class. And if I have time, some of the math for the class. Basically, everything the FRQ is going to ask you to do, I'm going to try and do in the live stream for the Super Saturday. I'm going to guarantee that I'll get through all the graphs. I might be able to get through all of the FRQ things I could see, which would include comparative advantage in terms of trade, would include bank balance sheets, would include some of the math for GDP and nominal versus real versus deflator and all that stuff. Like, that's the game plan for next Saturday. Okay. But that is it for today's video. Thank you guys for watching. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. Greatly appreciate it. And I wish you all the absolute best. Thank you all very much.